FPL Game Week 19. The deadline is tomorrow. So in today's video, we're not only going to do my team selection as the video is titled, we're going to cover everything you need to know going into the Game Week 19 deadline as well. We're going to answer some of your key questions. We're going to have a look at benching rankings, best players to buy. Potentially, are we going to sell Cunha and Fernandes this week? We'll also have a look at a wildcard draft that you should potentially be using because it's the last opportunity to play a wildcard if you haven't used it already. And then we'll finish up with my team selection. We'll have a look how I got on in Game Week 18. We'll have a look at some potential transfers. Of course, I have Cunha and Fernandes who's now suspended. I have one free transfer. Should I be making a transfer or should I just be rolling this week? What is up everyone, FPL Harry here. Before we dive in, 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you're new around here as well. And as I said, we have just one upload going into Game Week 19 as the deadline is tomorrow. So in today's video, we're going to cover everything you need to know. So hopefully there's useful. If you're looking for the team selection bit only, that's going to be the last part of the video. So if you want to go and watch that, that will be at the end. But there's going to be a lot of useful stuff as we cover going into this video. So if you find it useful, you want to join, we're so close to 150,000 subscribers as well. Hopefully we'll hit it on the Game Week 19 deadline stream, if not before. So if you want to support the channel, do hit subscribe. The first thing we're going to ask is Cunha going to be available? And we'll continue to answer this every week. The answer remains yes. He continues to ruin my rank, having sold him, thinking that he might get suspended. The FA have not got their act together. They're still sort of deliberating. They're still maybe on their Christmas holidays. Cunha is not suspended for the trip to Spurs going into Game Week 19. He should be available. Next up is what to do with Cunha and Fernandes. He was a big transfer in, including for myself going into Game Week 18. He did get suspended and will miss Newcastle at home before being back for Liverpool away in Game Week 20. So basically the next two fixtures are Newcastle and then he's suspended and then it's Liverpool away. It does follow by Southampton at home and Brighton at home after that. I still remain that I don't actually love any of the replacements for the Bukayo Saka position and so in theory for the Cunha and Fernandes position as well. If you have a bench cover, I do still think there is an ability to bench him, and that might be what I end up doing this week. However, we will talk about some potential midfielders that you can sell him to going into later in the video, but I don't think it's clear cut that you have to sell him. In terms of captaincy ranking, we're going to keep Mo Salah number one. I think that's 12 game weeks in a row he has failed to blank so far this season now, and he is on absolute fire. The hauls are flooding in. We're going to have several of the key West Ham players likely to be out. There'll be no Fabianski. There might be no Kilman as well. Generally, they've not been good defensively so far this season as well. So Mo Salah is going to remain as the number one captaincy option. We are going to put Erling Haaland number two. He goes up against that Leicester team. We've seen that Leicester defend over the past few weeks and over the past season as well. And they have been absolutely dreadful. And any Leicester fan will know that Liverpool put up so many chances against them. Yes, Haaland has been blanking, but if you own him still, going away to Leicester is still a fixture you should probably be considering putting the captaincy armband on him for. Number 3 is going to be Cole Palmer. I do expect him to start. There is a slight chance of a little bit of Chelsea rotation, but I don't think Cole Palmer will be one of those players impacted, particularly because Chelsea just have 1 point in their last 2 games combined. So I do think Palmer will start, and away at Ipswich is a good fixture. And finally, number 4 is going to be Alexander Isak. He is a man on form at the moment, and he goes away to a Manchester United team who will be without Cunha and Fernandes and do look pretty fragile defensively as well. I haven't really put in a number 5 because I don't really think there is another standout option. The Spurs guys at home to Wolves might potentially be ones to consider, but we've seen them attack and not be that fluid at the moment, so I'm not certain I'd be putting the captaincy armband on them. I don't really think I'd put on anyone that aren't in my top 4 here. So then what we're going to do is have a look at who has the best fixtures when you're having a look to players to target with your transfers this week. Number 1 at the top is going to be Crystal Palace. So if you're looking at a Mateta potentially as a punt up front, if you're looking at an Ismail Assar in midfield, a Henderson in goal is going to be very popular, and I think is the best goalkeeper to buy if you are looking to buy one this week. Also Daniel Munoz if you're having a look at defender this week. Fulham also high up this list. If you're having a look at an Alex Iwobi, he is still a good option. I do expect it to be Raul Jimenez that starts for Fulham in this fixture, but there's a chance it's Muniz, so probably would stay clear of them. But in defence, Castagna and Robinson remain really good buys. Newcastle also high up. Chelsea also high up. You do have Everton starting to come back. So if you're looking for a cheap defender, Mikalenko might be back on the menu given that Everton have only conceded more than 1 goal in, I think, 1 of their last 13 Premier League games. So the defensive record has been really solid for Everton as of late, and they are very high up. Of course, Liverpool remain with some good fixtures. And what's interesting about Manchester United and Cunha and Fernandes, the next 2 are not great. But after that, they do enter a pretty nice run of fixtures. So that's why you might be tempted a little bit to hold on to Bruno Fernandes. Now, lower down the list, we're having a look at the Wolves. If you own Cunha, you can hold him until he gets a suspension, but the fixtures are not great. You've got Brentford down there, West Ham as well. So actually, Fabianski being suspended now or injured now is not the worst time for it to happen if he is your second goalkeeper. Then we're having a look at Ipswich. We've also got Bournemouth and Manchester City are low down, but their next couple of games are pretty good. So having a look at the best and worst defenses, this does remain from game week 18. A very quick turnaround in terms of videos, and the data has not really been updated anywhere. Liverpool are at the top. They are still the best attack, and we saw them put up big numbers in the game against Leicester as well. They will remain there. And also Arsenal kept a clean sheet. They will remain the best defense. Looking at some of the cheaper ones, Crystal Palace having some pretty decent defensive numbers, and they're getting better. And actually after the Bournemouth game, they're probably a little bit higher up. And in terms of attackers as well, Crystal Palace not that high up, but they've been better over the past few weeks, putting up 1.65 XG per 90 over the past 6 game weeks. So again, we are expecting the likes of Crystal Palace to get slightly higher up the list. But again, a ranking here for you depending on the best attacks and the best defenses. And you've also got it referenced to the past 6 game weeks, depending on how well people have done recently. Going into our benching rankings, there's probably not as many benching rankings this week, particularly with a lot of us owning Bruno Fernandes, probably making our benching decisions quite straightforward this week. But in goal, if you've got Alisson, I would start him over David Raya. You've also got Sells in there, Pickford, Sanchez, Verbruggen, Flecken and Fabianski are both doubts. So if Flecken is out and you've got Valdemarsson probably falls in the same position as Fabianski. If you've got Areola, he also falls in the same position as Fabianski. We don't really have official confirmation at time recording on how long Flecken and how long Fabianski are likely to be out for. So there are going to be press comments today. If you need to have a little bit of an update, do check out on those. And there have been a couple of updates yesterday, but no real update on either of those goalkeepers. So if you've got them or you've got their backups in Areola or Valdemarsson, they probably fall into the same place in this ranking. Moving into defence, if you've got Arsenal defence, they do still need to be a start every week. As we saw, they can keep clean sheets no matter who they're playing against. Robinson and Castagna of Fulham going at home to Bournemouth are definite starts. You've got Ola Aina. Of course, there's no Munoz. There's no Crystal Palace in this list, really, just because they've got Southampton at home. If you own them, you've got to be starting your Crystal Palace players at home to Southampton. Mikalenko at home to Nottingham Forest is a pretty decent fixture. If you've still got your Manchester City defenders, you should really be starting them as well in Lewis and Carvalho. Kirkes, then we drop down to Lewis Hall, Konza, Mazraoui and Dalot, and probably Van Heck at the bottom of the list. Then we're having a look at the attackers, probably the most important one. If you don't own a Bruno Fernandes or a suspended player, he's probably the big thing that's making benching decisions pretty easy this week. Ismail Assar is the number one. Again, with Southampton, you should be starting him. If you own Cunha, I would be starting him as well. Iwobi is next, and I do expect Jackson to start for Chelsea. There is a small chance that it is Nkunku, given that we play 3 times in a week, and that's happened before. But as a Chelsea fan and as a Jackson owner, I do hope that Jackson starts, and I think he should. Chelsea, again, just 1 point in their last 2, and we are a much worse team when Jackson's not in the lineup. So I hope he does start. Gordon next, then Chris Wood, then João Pedro. I still would start João Pedro over Rodgers, probably over Brian Mbeumo, given he goes up against Arsenal, Ahmad, and then Enzo Fernandez at the bottom of the list. So with that in mind, having a look at the best players to buy in goal, Henderson has actually gone to the number 1 spot with the fixtures we've seen for Crystal Palace over the next few weeks. Leno is in at number 2. Fulham have been really good. If you're looking to buy a Fulham defender but you can't fit them in, Leno is still not a bad buy. But the Fulham defenders do have the benefit of being cheaper and having more attacking threat as well. Jordan Pickford with their nice run of fixtures starting to get a bit better in at number 3. Also, they've looked great defensively. Then it is the premiums. Alisson and Raya are still absolute holds and decent buys if you want to go and get them. But some of those cheaper ones might be offering better value now. But with Bukayo Saka being out, maybe you don't need to be saving the money. Into defence, Trent still remains number 1 despite no returns last week, and Gabriel remains number 2. If you still want to be having a look at a double up on either of those teams, Timber and Virgil van Dijk are the second best defenders from both of those lineups. Munoz at home to Southampton does go in number 3. Again, a clean sheet for them in game week 18 against Bournemouth, and a nice run of fixtures starting now for them as well. Castagna is a better buy than Robinson based on the value difference that they are, so he is in at number 4. If you want a slightly more expensive one, Chelsea, it is going to be Cucurella. The attacking threat is better than the rest of the Chelsea defence, despite it being Colwill that got the assist for the Palmer goal in game week 18. Cucurella is a bit of a differential shout, but the other cheap options that you can look at is Mikalenko of Everton with their fixtures getting better. Into midfield, of course, there's no Mo Salah and there's no Cole Palmer in here, which makes the list actually really difficult to build this week. If I was actually looking to buy a midfielder this week, it's probably Ismail Assar because he has that Southampton at home game. He looks like he's playing 90 minutes for Crystal Palace pretty much every week, and some of that is actually up front later on in the game. when we see Mateta come off the pitch. Iwobi is still a good buy. He's in at number 2 with Bournemouth at home, and then it is going to be Martinelli. I still favour him over going with Odegaard. He was actually playing pretty central. He didn't get a lot of the ball, but it's the positions he was taking up that I still quite like as a potential Martinelli buyer, and I still think I would go with him over buying Odegaard. But Odegaard does have penalties and set pieces, which you might just feel a little bit safer buying, which I don't mind either. Anthony Gordon in at number 4. I do like what he's doing. He's starting to hit that really good run of form. We saw passages of play last year where he was really, really good. Jacob Murphy is also one to consider from Newcastle at quite a cheap price, but again, none of us are really that strapped for cash, so I do think I would go with Anthony Gordon. If you want to go with Murphy at the cheaper price, it's not bad. The only issue is he doesn't play 90 minutes every week. It's normally 60, 70, which does put me off going for him just a little bit. Kulusevski, again, the most nailed of the Spurs midfielders. I did like Maddison, but he dropped out for some reason. They are just a better team when Maddison is in the lineup, but he doesn't start every week. So Kulusevski is in, and then Morgan Rogers in at number 6 if you're looking for another cheap one. With some nice fixtures and Leicester at home, it is key for Rogers next week. Then moving up front, Alexander Isak remains the best forward to buy if you don't own him. Gabriel Jesus is still in at number 2. He didn't play as many minutes as we'd want, but he still looked pretty good. You could also go with Kai Havertz, who did score. I think I would still just favour the cheaper of the two. Maybe Havertz is still slightly more nailed, but with the players out like Bukayo Saka, I do expect Jesus to start the majority of games they've got coming up, and I do think I would buy him over buying Kai Havertz at the moment. Again, if selling Saka is freed up money to go and buy Erling Haaland, away at Leicester is a great entry point. I can't put you off it. It's probably not worth the money, but if you don't have the money to spend on something else, I don't mind the Haaland purchase. Then we've got Jackson in at number 4, and we're finally going with Chris Wood at number 5. There are a couple of forwards that aren't on this list. The other one is Dominic Solanke. I don't mind that. Just Spurs don't feel like they're completely ticking at the moment, which does put me off. And the other one is Ollie Watkins. John Duran of Aston Villa is suspended for the next 2 Premier League games and 1 Cup game. So he only misses 2 Premier League games. And Ollie Watkins has to really impress in those 2 games to keep his place long term. I personally wouldn't be taking the punt on it. Yes, he might have that little fire. Yes, he's going to play 90 in those 2 games. But for me, there's too much risk that it is Duran that comes back in game week 21 when he's finished his suspension. So I personally don't mind the Watkins punt for 2 weeks, but I don't think I'd be doing it because I'd want someone for the long term. Next up is having a look at projections. So having a look at the big teams predicted to score goals this week. We have Manchester City, we have Liverpool, we have Chelsea, we have Arsenal, and then if you want to back Spurs to finally click at home, they are predicted to score 2.45 goals as well. Crystal Palace also high up if you have the likes of Mateta, Eze or Sarr also predicted to do well. Clean sheets a little bit more difficult to predict though, because those big goals also come up against some teams who do score some goals. No team hitting that 40% benchmark for a predicted clean sheet, which is what we really aim for, to have a, in theory, banker clean sheet. The closest that we get, we do have Crystal Palace at home to Southampton with 38%, Arsenal, Chelsea with 36%, alongside Manchester City and Liverpool at 34%. Those are the only teams above 30% chance, but none of them hit that 40% chance. So it feels like more goals, less clean sheets this week. And as it is the last opportunity for you to play your first wildcard before game week 19, here is a draft. If you haven't yet to play it, you may as well activate it, even if you just want to make 1 or 2 transfers this week. Henderson is going to go in goal, but we are going to be rotating him with Sells rather than going for a premium goalkeeper. We've gone with Henderson and the Sells rotation. In defence, the 2 cheap options on the bench are going to be Mikalenko and Howson of Bournemouth. There have been a few links with Howson to some top European clubs in January. I don't think that's going to happen given that of the Senesi injury for Bournemouth. I doubt they let him go, so I am going to pick him. Robinson in defence. I've gone with Robinson over Munoz, and I've gone with Henderson in goal, just because Henderson's really nice and cheap. So Robinson's in, Gabriel, and I would see Trent stay in the wildcard draft. Into the midfield, Mo Salah and Cole Palmer are the only real expensive ones. I haven't gone for any of the Odegaards. I haven't gone for any of the Gordons, the Martinelli, or even a Bruno Fernandes. I've gone with Sarr, I've gone with Iwobi, and I've gone with Morgan Rogers, probably as the 3 cheap ones that I've gone with, but I would stay in and around that price at the moment because it allows you up front to go with Gabriel Jesus, to go with Isak, and to go with Jackson and have good first bench cover this week and going forward as well. So that is everything you need to know in this video. Let's talk about everything I need to know going into game week 19. Let's start off with how I got on in game week 18. Unfortunately for me, it was a red arrow, pretty much all down to the Bruno Fernandes red card. I got 60 points. The safety score was 66, so I was 6 points away from getting a flat arrow. I dropped from 45k down to 58k. Listen, it's not ideal when a player gets sent off, and to get a green arrow when a player gets sent off is pretty unlikely. Maybe the Bruno Fernandes decision is one I regret, yes, but I don't regret buying him over buying other players. I just regret, on my deadline stream, I almost rolled my transfer, and that would just have been the best thing. I could have rolled again this week. So I regret just not rolling a transfer. I don't really regret not buying another player, basically, is where I'm at. So I might just roll a transfer again, but we'll talk about that. Defensively, actually, things went pretty well. Ryan, Munoz, and Gabriel all with clean sheets this week. Trent, a little bit disappointing with that Leicester fixture. But Bruno Fernandes getting sent off, not only did that give him -2, he didn't get any time in the second half to get any returns, and it also ruined Manchester United as well. So Ahmad didn't get anything as well. So that really, really impacted my team. And I imagine if Bruno Fernandes hadn't had that red card, with the second half, potentially all I would have needed is Fernandes to play some minutes, not get sent off, and get a single return between Fernandes and Ahmad. And I probably would have had a flat or a green arrow this week. So it's not the end of the world. Salah, of course, got his goal as my captain. Cole Palmer actually would have been a slightly better captaincy option this week. Up front, it's disappointing. Isak continuing to do really well. Jackson was a little bit disappointing again, as was João Pedro. I continue to keep my eye on them. The only issue is I don't really have replacements for them. Like, there's no real forwards that stand out to me. We'll talk about a few, but I plan on probably keeping them for the next couple of weeks. Benching, nothing really happened, apart from I didn't bench Mykolenko points for about the first time I benched him and he didn't get points. And Greaves played. Greaves got on the pitch and he didn't have the worst performance. Now, I don't ever plan on starting him, but at some point it might be useful if he does get back into that Ipswich team. And of course, I have Fabianski, who may well now be injured. So having a look at potential transfers, there's two players I'm really considering selling this week, which are Bruno Fernandes or João Pedro. Those are the real issue players I look at in my team. However, I do still think they are both pretty decent long-term holds. They're both playing 90 minutes at the moment. They both like to be on penalties with their team, and they both have pretty decent long-term fixtures as well. In terms of the replacement of buying an Arsenal attacker, which was going to be the plan this week, Odegaard versus Martinelli is pretty close. Odegaard's probably more involved from open play, but Martinelli probably is closer to the goal and more likely to get an actual FPL return, unless it's a penalty or a corner, which Odegaard, of course, does take. Or I could go up to Gabriel Jesus in the forward line, or, of course, I could go to Kai Havertz as well. Picking between them, I still think I would go with Gabriel Jesus, although he did come off a little bit earlier in that game against Ipswich last night. I'm not fully certain on where I'd go if I was to go Jesus or Havertz. Maybe Havertz is slightly more nailed out of the two. I was going to be priced out, and I would still be priced out, but if I was to sell Bruno Fernandes as a downgrade, I could then afford João Pedro up to Kai Havertz, but I can't at the moment just do João Pedro up to Kai Havertz with one transfer. Again, I probably prefer Martinelli over Martin Odegaard. But of course, I only have one Arsenal slot available. So if I was potentially looking at some other replacements that don't play for Arsenal, in terms of that midfield spot, it probably would be Sarr as the #1 pick with how good their long-term fixtures are. But if I didn't want to have too many Crystal Palace players in my 11, I could potentially go to Anthony Gordon, who is the other one that I'm potentially looking at this week. The other reason that I might not buy Sarr is I have a potential eye on going Mateta. He's playing 80 minutes at the moment, but he is likely to be on penalties, as we saw earlier on in the season. And as I said, they have a pretty nice run of fixtures. The only issue is I just think Sarr is a better pick than Mateta. He's playing more minutes. His goal threat looks just as good. He finishes the game up front. His pacing behind is fantastic. He looks like he's playing on more form as well. It's basically just the penalties that Mateta has that makes him maybe slightly better than Sarr. But there's like 1.5 million between them. So I do think Sarr is better, but it does take up a midfield spot. The other one up front, I could just go back to Chris Wood. I miss having Chris Wood in my team. He was the old reliable for me every week or every other week, just getting a 9-pointer, just ticking along. I just didn't ever really feel like I needed to worry about him in my forward line. And now I just feel like every week I'm like, oh, do I make a forward transfer? Do I not? And having Chris Wood might make it a little bit safer and just a little bit more, solidified in my forward line and just hold him for the long term. Everton away this week is not the most brilliant entry point, though, is probably the only thing I would say about Chris Wood. So what does this actually mean for my lineup going into game week 19? We're going to start with David Raya in goal, and we double up in defence with Gabriel as well. Trent Alexander-Arnold and Munoz is an easy start. The only slight debate I've got is I do have Mykolenko on the bench at the moment at home to Nottingham Forest. It won't be any of my starting defenders that I do bench. It, in theory, could be one of my attackers if I decide not to make a transfer that could drop to the bench and I play a 4-4-2 or a 4-3-3, for example. At the moment, with Bruno Fernandes suspended, I actually plan on rolling the transfer. And I know it might seem crazy that I bought Fernandes, I wasn't sure about it, now he's sent off, and now I just plan on keeping him. But I don't still love any of the replacements, and Enzo and Ahmad still have good fixtures. and João Pedro away at Aston Villa is just not the end of the world anyway. So at the moment, because I don't love anything, I actually plan on rolling my transfer, and I probably will roll my transfer going into game week 20 as well, which means in my midfield at the moment, I've got Palmer and Enzo doubling up on Chelsea, along with Jackson in my forward line is a triple up on the Chelsea attack. Hopefully against Ipswich, they all start and they can get some goals. Hopefully Chelsea score 2 or 3 goals in that game and there is some involvement for some of them, because that's going to be a big definer on how my game week goes. Mo Salah is in, and of course we'll get the captaincy armband for me away at West Ham. Just so consistent, just so on form at the moment as well. Then it is Ahmad as my final starting midfielder. Again, I could bench either Ahmad, Enzo, or João Pedro for Mykolenko. I don't think I'm going to do it, but Everton are so solid defensively and are so good at home. It feels really, really strange to bench Mykolenko in a fixture like this at home to Nottingham Forest. He will, of course, be practically my only sub this week if anyone wasn't to play, which is not the end of the world, because we often do get a little bit of rotation when there's a lot of fixtures close together. So if someone doesn't get any minutes, which I don't really see looking at my lineup, maybe if Jackson doesn't start, maybe if Enzo doesn't start, maybe that might mean I get Mykolenko, but I don't really see anyone in my 11 who's unlikely to play any minutes at all. So Mykolenko is at the moment, unfortunately, first on my bench. If you would start Mykolenko over anyone else in my starting 11, please do drop it all in the comment section down below. As I said up front, it's Jackson, it's João Pedro, and it's Isak. I'm happy with Jackson, I'm happy with Isak. I'm not loving João Pedro, but if Ferguson and Welbeck are not going to be in the squad, he is playing up front for them at the moment. He's basically playing 90 minutes. He's on penalties. He could have had some assists in that game the other night as well. I don't love the replacements, basically, and I think rolling a transfer is probably more important, and Villa have not been watertight defensively so far this season. So it might seem weird, it might seem boring, it might mean that I get Redo this week, but I just think I don't love the options. I didn't love the options last week, and I wish I rolled, so I don't love the options this week, so I wish I roll, and I think that's where I'm going to be going into game week 19. So that is all for this all-in-one video. We've discussed hopefully everything you need to know. We've also discussed my team as well. If you haven't got all of your questions answered in this video, drop them all in the comment section down below. If not, come over and click notify on the deadline stream, which is also scheduled above. It is tomorrow. Of course, it's a slightly later deadline of 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So make sure you tune into that to get a reminder when the stream goes live. If you don't get your questions answered in this video or in the comment section down below, come and tune into that and we'll discuss everything and we'll see if I really do decide to roll my transfer this week or I give in to the FOMO of another player. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. 2,000 likes is the aim. 150,000 subscribers is also the aim. We are so close. So if you've enjoyed all of this in one video, hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching and we'll be back again very soon.